Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, MSU Extension, the MSU Ag Experiment Station of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, and the Gallatin Gardeners Club.
You are tuned to Montana Ag Live, originating today from the studios of KUSM on the very exciting campus of Montana State University and coming to you over your Montana Public Television System. I'm Jack Riesemann, a retired professor of plant pathology. Happy to be your host this evening. Those of you who have watched the program in the past know how it works. You provide the questions and we provide the answers, or in some cases the best guess, but we try our best. And if we can't answer tonight, we'll get to it next week with the correct answers. I will say this program can get pretty boring without your questions. So if you don't supply the questions, we're going to sit here like dunces, which sometimes we're credited with being. But anyway, get those questions in. The more questions we have, the faster this program goes, and the more we learn. And comments, if you have comments, please feel free to enclose those with the phone operators I'll introduce in a moment. Let me introduce tonight's guest, Uta McElvery. Uta is an extension plant pathologist. She's been here about 2 years now in this position. She's been here on the program many, many times. Jane Worley. Jane is our special guest tonight, and we're going to learn a lot about the 4-H Foundation. The 4-H Foundation is one of the best organizations that we have here in the state of Montana. They provide funds for various young students, I believe up to 18 years old. We're going to learn about that and learn what you could possibly do to help the 4-H Foundation. Erica Rodbill has been here a couple times. She's answered the phone before. She's an interim entomologist, extension entomologist. Last time she was here, she was a graduate student, so she's moved up in the world. Not against the grad students, I'm not picking on you. But Erica, we're glad to have you here. And of course, Abby Saeed. And Abby is our extension horticultural specialist. And answering the phone tonight is Amber Graham and Cheryl Bennett. So that phone's not ringing yet. Let's get on. The number will be up there in a couple seconds. Jane, 4-H Foundation. I've heard a lot about it. Tell us what you do and what the foundation does.
Well, Jack, the 4-H Foundation, 4-H program is multifaceted, of course, and so there are county-level programs and statewide programs. The 4-H Foundation helps raise the funds and manage the funds that are donated to help support the program all across the state. And so we pledge $150,000 to the program operation budget of the Montana 4-H Center. That makes 4-H able to happen in the way that we know it today across this state.
You know, I wasn't in 4-H when I was a kid. I lived on a farm, but I was more interested in hunting, fishing than 4-H. But I've taken a liking to it, and I just want to show this picture here. This is a Gallatin County 4-H brochure that came out in the Bozeman Chronicle, and it illustrates all the activities and the prizes that went on at the county fair here in Gallatin County. Every county has that. This is incredible. This is what 4-H does. And how many kids are involved with 4-H in the state?
Well, in the state of Montana, we have about 17,000 youth across the state who are affected by the program. Enrolled members in traditional clubs, what many people might think of as traditional 4-H, are around 9,000 4-H members across the state. So quite a few, and you know, we do have an outdoor education program. So that wildlife and hunting, there'd be lots of opportunity for youth today to be involved in 4-H in that way, as well as STEM projects and so many other ways. So.
Back when I was a youngster, which is a few years ago, things were a little different. We didn't have outdoor 4-H programs. I'll tell you how much has changed. I used to drop my sister off at school at 8 o'clock for bed, and I'd hunt pheasants for the next hour. And then I'd take the gun into industrial arts and clean it. Try to do that today. Times have changed, but thank you for that information. Let's move on a little bit. I have a question here for you. And this came in over the internet. People sent photos in of a tree. I think it's fire blight, but they would like to know what is wrong with this specific tree. And if you could get those photos up on the screen here in a moment, tell us a little bit about fire blight and how you manage it.
Yeah, so fire blight is a common disease that we see around town and other places in Montana. It's a bacterial disease that affects plants in the Rosacea family, so apple, crabapple, pears, etc. And so actually, yeah, so the picture we're seeing, that could be fire blight. So we're seeing like branches and twigs where the leaves are brown, scorched, wilted, and then also that the end of the branches are kind of bending like a shepherd's crook. So those are some characteristic symptoms of fire blight. So it's a bacterial disease. The infection happens in the spring via the flowers. Insects can transmit these bacterial pathogens, and it can also be a rain splash. But if we're not careful with, for example, pruning our trees, that's a way to spread this pathogen too. So at this time in the year, probably the best thing somebody can do that has fire blight is, I would say, wait a couple more weeks until we're in the dormant season, and then focus on pruning out those affected branches. A few inches, I think 8 to 10 inches underneath the diseased area to really make sure we're getting all of the diseased plant tissue out. The leaves are probably not dropping from those infected branches, but I would also rake up all the leaves that are underneath the tree and dispose of them, because that's where the pathogen could overwinter. And then it would be a very good idea to sanitize the pruning equipment with rubbing alcohol or similar to prevent the spread that way. You have anything to add, Abby?
Yeah, like I would say one of the things, because you were recommending dormant season, is to flag the branches
That's
that
a great
are
idea.
fire blight, so you know which ones you want to remove and
The
where.
leaves have a tendency to stay on a little longer when they die from fire blight, so it is pretty simple to prune it.
Yeah.
One thing I want to mention, I had 3 crabapple trees many years ago, and my neighbor put in an underground sprinkler system that allowed them to get wet every day, and they lasted about 1 year from fire blight.
yeah.
So watch overhead irrigation is very critical.
Yeah.
Question from Valentine. This person would like to know where the funding comes from for the 4-H Foundation.
Oh, we are so fortunate at the 4-H Foundation. Our funding comes from all kinds of places. It's generous benefactors mostly. We have sometimes people will leave an endowment to us to help fund things for 4-H across the state. We have yearly donors. We have people. We have a 4-H alum who reached out, and because the program has been so impactful to her, she asked if we would invoice her monthly so she wouldn't miss a month while she builds an endowment to support national travel for 4-H youth, because that's one of the things that we do is provide that. So the funding comes from all kinds of sources, from corporate sponsorships to individuals sending a check every year or reoccurring donations that are through our website. So lots of different places.
So, say you're in Saunders County or in Blaine County, and how do you allocate the foundation funds to those programs? Do the county 4-H agents actually apply for those dollars, or is it automatically given to separate programs?
So the funding is very interesting. We don't directly give necessarily to a county 4-H program in that way, but we support all of the program efforts from the program specialists in the 4-H center, which in turn makes 4-H be able to exist across the state. We also have a couple of endowments that support programming out, and I love this because there's one called the People Partner Grant, and the funding from that allows youth to apply when they see a problem in their community that they think they have a solution for, And there's always going to be a little bit of expense to that. So they can apply for funding through the Montana 4-H Foundation. They can get that experience of solving the problems they see right in their own communities, and it's phenomenal. So we have all kinds of different ways that youth are affected, and then of course the statewide leadership programs like Montana 4-H Congress. Many people would recognize that as one of our premier programs.
I like that problem solving. I think that's a great program. I think we ought to promote that a little bit more, but that's my own personal opinion. From Bozeman, they remember when Erica was on talking about alfalfa weevil and insecticide resistance when she was working on her doctorate. They would like to know the results of that, and that's interesting because we're growing more and more alfalfa here in the Gallatin County and statewide. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of alfalfa that's started to be grown in the last few years. Weevil still an issue?
Oh yeah, absolutely. The results of the project illustrated that all of the pyrethroids that are registered for the control of alfalfa weevils in forage alfalfa systems are ineffective if you develop resistance to them. And that, of course, comes from applying the same product over and over and over again. Now, what we did find is that once you pull back from using pyrethroids for about 4 years, if you switch over to a different mode of action group altogether, you can regain the efficacy of those pyrethroids again. So it's not a doom and gloom, one and done. It's give it time, take a breather, pay a bit more for another insecticide on the market, and then revisit it. Check back in. You'll see regained efficacy there.
So if you have a serious alfalfa weevil problem, and a lot of producers do, and you don't control them, what is the economic loss to, say, a crop or an acre of alfalfa? How much can the weevil destroy?
I've seen 100% yield loss in a dryland production system, so the alfalfa can regain biomass really quickly. With irrigation, they have a little bit more of a fighting chance. And of course, it depends on the degree of the infestation. So just because you have alfalfa weevil doesn't automatically mean that you're looking at a substantial loss. If you have around an average of 10 alfalfa weevils per sweep of a sweep net, or 2 to 3 alfalfa weevils per stem, that's the economic threshold. That's when you're running into that economic burden of loss. Yeah.
Okay,
So
thank
if
you.
you're switching to, a different mode of action, would you recommend, like within that 4-year period, also switching that around, so not using the same product that whole time?
The integrated resistance management idea of how to combat this issue is to rotate the mode of action group, or at least rotate your method of management so that you don't repeat it once every 3 years is kind of the maximum. So when you're dealing with resistance, your ability to combat those populations is obviously restricted. So it's not like we have a never-ending pile of insecticides at our disposal. We're very much limited in what we can and cannot do. So what a rancher in Bighorn County, Montana did, per our recommendation, was to spray Stewart EC, the active ingredient of which is indoxacarb. It's mode of action group 22A. And he used that for 4 years straight. And he had extreme resistance the first year, and then the 4th year, he was back to normal levels. So that's what he did. It worked well for him, but it's very costly. Stewart is about 6 times more expensive than pyrethroids because it's not generic. Pyrethroids are. There's a variety of factors at play that can feed into a decision.
Okay.
Can I
Yeah.
throw in another question? So, Erica, if a grower had a pyrethroid resistance in their alfalfa weevil population, and then they stopped using that insecticide and wanted to reintroduce it after 3 years, do you have a recommendation how they should apply it? Like, should they just spray and see how many weevils are left after? Do a trial strip maybe? Do you have a recommendation for that?
I always recommend that folks test the waters before diving headlong into it, because the last thing you want to do is spray something and hope that it works
and put all your eggs in one basket. If you know that indoxacarb is working for you and has consistently over the past 3 to 4 years, you can do a trial, and I've done many or helped with many from Arizona, Oregon, Washington, and Montana. So it's easily done. Farmers know, ranchers know what works for them, and I strongly encourage that if you have this problem or have had this problem in the past, try dabbling, play around with it.
Let's change the tune a little bit here. And this caller from Billings has deer eating the bark off his immature aspen trees. What can be done to stop this? The hunting season starts in about 3 weeks. So,
Yeah, no, but yeah, this is timely and good to kind of protect, especially young trees, thin-barked trees. It's a good idea to use any sort of tree guard. You can get those tree guard that look like little netting. You can also get those corrugated plastic white ones that can help protect from sun scald in the winter too. So some sort of a physical barrier or a fence that's going to keep them away from that main bark. You're going to need some sort of a physical barrier.
a barking dog works good.
Yeah, a dog on duty.
Yes, absolutely. Back to Jane from Billings. This person would like to know, are there any specific programs or goals that the foundation is trying to look at or they'd like to invest in?
Well, we want to, of course, maintain what we have, but a goal that I've had is looking at our program specialist area. The outdoor ed program that I mentioned earlier, we have a less than part-time program specialist for that, and the 4-H Foundation is covering the entirety of that position right now. And if we look at the numbers of our enrollment, more than half of the youth are enrolled in outdoor ed types of programming, from wildlife to fishing. We have a shooting sports program, archery, all those different programs. And it's been a hugely impactful program across the state. So the numbers would lead us to think that that would be a great program to gain support for. Plus, as I drove down here today, we are an outdoor state. We have a lot of enthusiasts about our state, and so there may be somebody out there who just doesn't know, hasn't been invited yet to help fund that program, whether that's through an endowment for that position, or if that's helping support that $33,000 that we, through the foundation, put toward that program. But our students have gone on. We had an Olympian this year. We've had several Olympians come out of that shooting sports program. I know people who have had full ride scholarships because of it. They become those people who catapult into the careers of wildlife management, and they go on to serve in the military and are part of our law enforcement. And so this is a great program that I just think there's somebody out there knows somebody that we need to get introduced to who has a passion around that and can support it.
You know, we had the 4-H director on a year or two ago, and at that time, post-COVID, we were short of leaders, countywide 4-H leaders. And I know student numbers are staying up there, but have the leaders' numbers improved? And say if I wanted to be a leader, which I'm too old to do that, but
You are not.
I shouldn't have said that. How would you become a 4-H leader?
The best place to start is going to your local MSU Extension office and talking to them about how you want to be involved and many different things. And I would love to tell you that we have volunteers who are in their 90s and who are gaining as much from the program as the youth are from them. So it is never too late to give back in whatever capacity you have the capability to give. So I would really encourage people for that volunteer piece, because one of the things we know in terms of protecting our youth is a meaningful relationship with another caring adult in their lives can be powerfully influential.
Thank you. Okay. Last week we had a sample of tomato come in, and Dave Baumbauer was wrong, but I have to admit I agreed with him too. We thought it was insect damage. It came from Deborah Schultz, I believe, up at Columbia Falls. So we're going to revisit that a little bit tonight and show you how I was wrong, and you're just going to tell us why it was wrong.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Jack, that's big of you to say. So kudos. I'm coming in here at the tail end of this adventure, and I get to resolve this whole problem. So this is actually, this tomato here, kind of rotten at this point. The tomato that was sent in as a picture last week, and so it came to the diagnostic lab, and we did our due diligence diagnosing what was going on. I personally thought it was a bacterial issue, so we tested for that, and it's not either. So we came out with the diagnosis that this is actually a genetic disorder. It's called fruit pox. And genetic disorders generally are not super common in tomatoes because they're weeded out in the breeding program. But of the genetic disorders, this is a more common one. And so you might have thought this might be an insect issue because of these lesions, but really what distinguishes it from an insect feeding issue is that we see these lesions on the shoulder area of the tomato and not all over the fruit, which Jack, you pointed out correctly that I guess thrips are not that selective in where they're feeding. So there's not a lot you can do about it. It's also, I mean, it doesn't look pretty, but it's not a big issue.
You know, if we can have a picture of that, I don't know if we still have a picture from last week that shows what the spotting looked like. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
You know, genetics are really interesting because I have to admit, if that had been all over the tomato, I would have said thrips. But if I'd have seen the tomato in person, I probably would have said something else. But I have brought a couple of tomatoes. Yeah, I got to back up once in a while. I want to show these two tomatoes, and this is what genetic breeding can do for tomatoes. Now, they look like green tomatoes that have a virus, but instead, this is a variety called Green Zebra. And I've actually tasted this, and Mac Burgess has this at the garden, the MSU garden. They're actually a very tasty tomato, a little bit more acidic than some people may like. But that's genetics, and if I didn't know that was a variety, I'd have probably called that virus infection. So I've been wrong just once.
On this genetic problem, is that still an edible tomato?
So there, I mean, other than it not looking very appealing, and I will say the wrinkling is not because of the fruit pox, that's just time doing its thing on tomatoes, but generally, like, you can eat it. It doesn't look yummy, but there's nothing wrong with this tomato, really.
Sauces, canning, there's all,
Yeah.
all kinds of ways to use things.
Away goes the problem.
That one might not be very good in its current condition.
Anymore, yes. You know, on Friday, it looked a lot better,
Better,
so
it did.
I would have eaten it. Well, no, I don't eat samples that come in a diagnostic.
That's where I differ from you when I work there.
You're a brave man.
All right, let's move over to Abby for a quick one here. This person got as a gift one of those potted roses, little miniature rose, and they want to know if they put it out in the field or in their garden, will it survive the winter?
That's such a hard question without knowing the type of rose it is. So I would say for that one, you can contact me or your local extension office. If you have this tag that came with it, that'll tell you what kind it is. It'll tell you how hardy it will be. But roses in general, some of our native varieties do really well, but some of the ornamental varieties that look really pretty in those pots usually won't survive winters here.
They're lucky to survive in the pots very long, so I wouldn't waste my time.
No.
Is late summer or fall a good time anyway to transplant into the garden?
Fall is a good time usually, so spring and fall are the best times to plant things, and there are pros and cons for each of those. But fall, especially after plants go dormant, that's one of the best because the soil is still workable and you're not stressing out that root system very much. So adding enough moisture when you do that gives them a head start in the spring. Whereas if you plant in the spring, you're heading into those hot summer months, which could be stressful, but there are pros and cons for each.
I throw them away after they bloom. And nobody gives me roses, so I don't have to worry about it. Facebook question from Beth. They have a small vegetable garden, 10 by 12 inches inside. They dug our potatoes and they had many chucks taken out of the potatoes. I'm not sure what a chuck is. Not to mention what I believe to be grubs. Big white grubs an inch long. Will they feed on potatoes? I didn't know we had the big white grubs here. I know we had them in Billings, but Missoula?
Big white grubs can be a problem, especially in the fall. It's generally when you'll see some serious root damage, not just for potatoes, but for grasses as well, because it's when they start to feed. They sometimes, especially for big white grubs, they tend to spend a significant portion of their early life cycle in the soil, and then they emerge as adults. So they're probably packing on the pounds before the winter comes.
So they're basically June beetle larvae, correct?
Yep, that's correct.
And this is new to me, and she said they are seeing June beetles. Up until this call-in, and thank you for that, I only thought they were in Billings. Now they're in, what? They're all over?
No, we have June beetles all over the
this.
state, but the Japanese beetles are only in Billings.
Okay, so the warmer temperatures allow that to happen here?
Yeah, and also a lot of these, white grub beetle larvae species, they're native to the state, and so they're often decomposers and usually don't do very much plant damage, except for those Japanese beetle larvae. But yeah, when they're, I think, getting ready to overwinter, they're going to be going for any kind of source of food.
I think I've never seen June beetles here in Montana.
Oh, yeah.
Where would I look for them?
At night, at lights, midsummer.
See, I go to bed early.
By the way, before I became a fly fisherman, those big white grubs on a fish hook are devastating for trout. So that's a good way to use them up. But now that I fly fish and forgot about night crawlers and June beetle larvae, I've changed. This is a good question. Caller from Fairfield actually has two questions. Can Jane talk about how 4-H helps our youth in developing career opportunities? And I guarantee you it does. So you want to touch on that?
Well, certainly. I was an extension agent for more than 25 years in Montana and in Wyoming a few years, and before that I was a school counselor. So I have been long interested in how people get to the careers that they get to, and I think you'd be hard-pressed to ask a 4-H alum in their current career to find out if they're not using any skills that they learned in 4-H, because I think so many 4-H members, this is how they find their spark, this is how they move into their career, this is how they try out things that maybe aren't available to them in school. And I think of we talk about the spark for youth. I just have visited with a couple of 4-H alum who made their way through college on a 4-H photography project. So they built a 4-H photography business. And I visited with a volunteer the other day who has built an entire cottage food industry business. And she said, it's because of 4-H that I was able to do this. And I said, but you weren't even a member in 4-H. She said, I know, I joined as a parent and volunteer when my kids started. And she learned how to do food demonstrations and different things and has a thriving business now because of it. So I just know over the years, the 4-H alum who I've worked with, they're back in my community serving in so many capacities that I can tie right to 4-H.
You know, I'm going to mention a previous program we had when our extension plant pathologist was on, and her daughter was on that night. And she brought a rabbit along. And that rabbit sat at the edge of that desk for the entire program. We had more calls for the 11-year-old guest than we had for anybody else on the panel. And she was so articulate in answering them. And that sold me right there on 4-H. It is a really great program for youngsters.
Well, I think of our 4-H fair format, and you brought the pamphlet from Gallatin County, but our 4-H fairs use an interview format. So students have to come in, 4-H members come in with a project that they've done, and they speak to somebody they don't know, and they identify what they've done well, what they could have done better, how they got help, what they'd do next time, and think of the skills in interviewing with a potential employer when you can evaluate that for yourself. I know what my strengths are, I know where I need to make improvements. Employers tell me all the time when they have 4-H members interview, they can tell it right away that they had that skill. And I think it's so important to help youth explore and find new areas of interest so that they can move into careers.
That's a good reason to support the 4-H Foundation. There's no doubt about that. And we'll get into and we're not begging for dollars here, but we will tell people later on if they want to support the 4-H Foundation, how that can go on.
So speaking of daughters, what's the youngest age you can enroll youth in a 4-H program?
So our Cloverbud program is ages 5 to 8. October 1st is the age break there, and then the 4-H program is 8 to 18 by October 1st, and so we're moving into that time of year. Do you have one that can enroll yet?
We have to wait a few more years. But
I thought maybe. I thought I picked up on that. Yeah. And mine,
Start them early.
and mine are moving into their college and career years, so yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to do a little promotion for the Montana Ag Live newsletter. We had a coffee in the department the other day, and it's the Department of Plant Pathology and Plant Science. And a young lady, a young student by the name of Sophia Lattis, brought in huckleberry coffee cake. And it was incredible. And the recipe came from her and Katie in the kitchen door. But I'm going to give this recipe to Paul, and he's going to get it in the newsletter. So if you want a copy of this recipe, and I guarantee you, if you have huckleberries, you know, pancakes are good, muffins are good, but nothing's going to beat a huckleberry coffee cake. It's wonderful. So sign up for the Ag Live newsletter, and you will get this recipe in the next edition. Valentine. This is interesting. 2 questions. One for Yuta. They have more corn smut and sweet corn than normal. Is this weather related? They may have had a hail.
It could be, exactly like you say, Jack. Wounds inflicted on plant tissue can just help that corn smut pathogen get into its host and establish. But even without wounds, that's possible. If they're growing corn smut, if they're growing sweet corn or other corns like every year or in close rotation, those spores. Okay, so for those of you who don't know this, the corn smut, it produces these like really swollen galls that are often on the corn ears, and then they're filled with spores. So when the galls rupture, these spores are released, and so these spores can live in the soil for several years. And so if we keep rotating corn, we kind of perpetuate that disease. And so frequently growing corn in a garden or in a field can help with that.
And I'd like to add that corn smut is actually really delicious. So if you haven't tried, it's like the texture of like a mushroom, and you can saute it in some butter. It's actually a really tasty food, and it's eaten in a lot of places in the world. So that could be a way of a silver lining, maybe, a glass half full. You're now growing some delicious
before it's mature, when it's still
flavor.
a young gall.
Yeah, when it's smaller and younger, and it has that yummy umami flavor.
You got to catch it really early.
Maybe you can put the recipe in the newsletter.
I think there are a variety, but maybe I'll find my favorite corn smut recipe.
Okay, I'll make one comment on that, and then I'm going to move to a flea bed question. But I bought a can of canned corn smut one time in Arizona, and I disagree with you.
You didn't like it?
No, I didn't. It was mushy and not very tasty at all.
Maybe
So
that's a
maybe
canning
fresh
problem.
in butter.
Maybe fresh, sauteed in butter.
Yeah, okay, but canned, no. And also from Valentine, and Erica, this is your bailiwick. The caller deals with a lot of flea beetles. Is that because of the weather? And I have one more comment. He has been watching for years and has asked for more poultry panelists in the future. And unfortunately, MSU does not have a poultry scientist. But I tell you what, I'll see if I can't find somebody, maybe in the 4-H arena, to talk about poultry in the future. So flea beetles, I'm not sure on what crop.
I wish I knew on which crop, because that would be really insightful. They can and do readily feed on canola. I'm assuming that it may be canola that they're referring to, but I could be wrong. I actually published a Montana Ag Alert on flea beetle management on canola, but much of what that article describes can be utilized for other field crops as well. Look it up, it's online. I'd look up Ag Alert, and you can do the archive search and you will find flea beetle information there.
And in a home garden setting, I've seen kind of, just like any insect populations, you see fluctuating, population sizes. And this year I've had a lot of people comment that they've had more flea beetle damage in their home vegetable gardens, like on their eggplant, broccoli, things like that. So I think the seasonal variability, it's a pretty common part of insect life cycles.
Absolutely.
So as long as we're on insects, my wife tried to plant some ornamental cabbage this year. And these things are not cheap when you buy them from Lawn and Garden Center. And if I could pull up the photo of my ornamental cabbage that occurred after about 3 days sitting on the back deck, you can tell me what happened to them, or Erica can. There's my ornamental cabbage, or my wife's ornamental cabbage. They didn't last long. I can tell you what happened. There were hundreds of little green worms. In 3 days, they defoliated that. Now, my question is, if I have broccoli, cauliflower in the garden, I do get a few cabbage worms. There's no doubt about it, but nothing like this. So if I want to keep the cabbage worms out of my broccoli, Brussels sprouts, should I plant these as an attractant?
That's an expensive strategy for sure. Yeah, but yeah, people use trap crops in home gardens often, and this is an expensive version. But for this kind of issue too, I would say one of my most effective strategies for caterpillar pests of cabbage is usually using a netting or a row cover of some sort, because by the time, as you can see in the picture, by the time they get there, within a couple of days, they've done a catastrophic amount of damage.
Yeah, they were hungry, no doubt about it. Jane, Facebook comment. My kids are 4-H alumni. How can they or current members support the ongoing work of the foundation? Here's an opportunity to tell people how they can support the foundation.
Well, it's wonderful that alum think about that, and we do have many of our supporters are 4-H alum. But if you think about how many people have been in 4-H over the years and who are donating, I think we have a lot of room to grow in terms of that. So people who want to donate can go to our website. They can set up a recurring electronic donation. They can send a check to the Montana 4-H Foundation. They'll find our address online, and then they'll start receiving some of our information and continue that way. And like I mentioned, if they want to start building towards something that's important to them, we are happy to invoice or help them in any way with that. But also, I think many of our ag producers are 4-H alum.
True.
And I was thinking about one of the donors to our program was a couple who farmed on the High Line and did not have any heirs. And so they decided to give their farm, the least money off their farm comes to us, and they separated that into several different charitable organizations. So I think there are many ways, maybe not all of our alum, this caller may have younger alum, and they're just starting in a career and wanting to get started. If they could give $4 a week, $40 a month, $400 a year, if people who are older and conceivably maybe have built a little bit more to be able to give, then they can generously give $400 and $4,000. But some of our ag families could be thinking about ways that they can manage an estate, especially if they don't have heirs. I think about if you don't have anyone to leave it to and you want to leave it to young people, wouldn't 4-H be an answer?
Yeah, I agree.
Sounds like we
It's a
should
great program.
work with Marcia Gooding on that.
Marcia Getting is on our board. So if people do want us to come talk to them, if they're thinking about it, and there's no hard sell or hard pressure or anything, but if they are considering an estate plan that includes 4-H, I would love to get around the kitchen table with them and talk about what that could do for our program in perpetuity.
Okay. Seeing what 4-H has done, I encourage people, and no gift is too small.
No.
So I like that. Back to the rose bushes. Chester, comment. She said you can keep them alive till it's time to pot them out after the winter. Just keep them wet and they like sun. Well, if you keep them too wet, they drown.
Yeah.
So it is really touchy. And if you want to grow roses, buy some roses that are adapted for this state.
Yeah, and we do have some varieties that are much better.
Okay, so we're going to change the tune and go back to Erica a little bit. So this past summer, I broke my cardinal rule. I say don't leave Montana in the summertime, but for whatever reason, I was out of the state more than I wanted to be this past summer. But I was in Denver and stayed at a Renaissance hotel, and I get to my door, and here's this note, plastic line on the door saying Miller moth migration. So I opened the door to the Renaissance, and 3 or 4 of them came out in the hallway. So obviously people were complaining. We did not have as many this year, did we?
No, we did not, but that's okay. I mean, it's part of the, they're home invaders, which is why they had the signs up, or at least they can be. And as they are moths, of course, they pollinate at night, which is really important. So you shouldn't, or I mean, you can if you want to, but I'm not encouraging you to do so. Please don't kill them. They're doing a great ecosystem service for us. But you can, if you want to make sure that they don't enter your home or they don't bother you, you have to make sure that your garage doors are sealed, make sure that your front door is sealed as well. Because they're pollinating at night, when the sun comes up, they're looking for a dark place to pass the day. So a tight, dark spot, just like underneath your door, really, is where they like to be. And so that's how they get into your home, is that they're desperately searching for a spot to spend their day. They go through 2 migrations in the spring, or late spring, early June. And they also have another one in the fall, early fall, which is happening right now. But there's a big summer die-off as well. So the fall migration that we're experiencing, it's shorter in regard to the number of weeks. But you have a fewer number coming over or moving back into the Midwest, which is...
A lot of people don't realize that the Miller moths are a preferred food for grizzly bears. And they migrate to the mountains, and they're kind of like monarch butterflies in Mexico. They congregate, and bears love them, and there's good protein for them. So just thought I'd mention that. Okay.
So do we know why there were fewer moths this year?
Pardon?
Do we know why there were fewer moths this year?
I don't know. I assume that a lot of them are armyworm, and there's several different kinds of Miller moths. But the most common one, I think, is the armyworm adult. And the years where the armyworm is down, we may not have as many of them. I have plenty, believe me. You know, vacuum sweeper. I know I'm not supposed to do that, right? I'm supposed to chase them outside.
Chase them outside.
Okay.
Much like you do with spiders.
You may. It depends on who's around. Okay. Let me see what else has come in here. Abby, caller is asking about her tomatoes that are red ripe, but there's a hard green layer underneath. Any idea what might cause that? I'm not sure.
It'd be nice to have a picture of that, because I'm trying to think about what they mean by underneath. Whether it's the skin that's tough and has a green layer underneath the skin, or if the lower part of the tomatoes are green. A lot of physiological water-related issues can cause different textures in the skin of tomatoes, and can also sometimes cause like issues like cat facing, where you'll see cracks and zippering and different abnormalities. So that would be a nice one, maybe to contact your local extension office. And send a photo to the Scudder Diagnostic Lab to see what.
You see what tomatoes do when we get them. They get all kinds of, and of course everybody in Montana loves to grow tomatoes, because it used to be a real challenge. It's not quite as challenging today. But yeah, I'd like to see that myself, because I'll make a guess again, but I'd be wrong, so I'll wait till I see them.
Yeah, maybe send it to the Scudder Lab, and we can probably talk about it next week.
Okay, from Three Forks, for Udon, they're growing triticale for the first time, and you might mention what triticale is, but they want to know, does it get ergot? Ergot is kind of an issue with a lot of grains.
I believe it can.
Yeah.
And yep, so there's your answer. It can, but what favors ergot production is, let's see, so it's, if you have had ergot before, often it's actually in the grasses, like if there was a pasture nearby or the grassy edges around a field, those grasses can get the ergot too, and then the pathogen spreads from there. So kind of mowing and maintaining those field edges and before the grasses flower would be a good way to reduce the risk of getting that ergot problem in your crop. And many probably know, but ergot is kind of a concern because it can cause some issues in livestock when they feed ergot-contaminated grain, and it's probably not too good for human consumption either at certain levels, so that's why we want to manage that.
Yeah, if you have quite a bit of it in the grain, you probably should be cautious in feeding it to cattle, because I think it's 0.3% by weight, which is toxic. So
I'm not sure about the threshold, but yeah, it can cause abortions
yeah.
and some blood circulation issues. Yeah.
Okay. Question from Foresight. It's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not sure if anybody on the panel can answer this. But this person says, I'm impressed with 4-H. I'd like to know when it started and where it started. So, Jane, anybody know? I do not.
So I believe that 4-H started in 1902, roughly, as far as the formal youth programs, and in Ohio area. In Montana, we celebrated the 100th year of 4-H in Montana in 2012, so we're well past our 100th year. So 4-H was started around 1912 in this state, and it's always been tied to the land-grant university and the extension programs in those different states.
Yeah, it's been around for a long time, and when they instituted this, it didn't take long to take off. I mean, I go back many years, and even back then, they tried to get me into 4-H. I didn't have time. There was other things like pheasant hunting and catfishing that was more important.
Well, I would like to mention again that we have lots of programs, and our outdoor ed program is really great, that for those who have a really different interest, there is a Design Your Own program. So it used to be called Self-Determined, now it's called Design Your Own, and what a great way to encourage young people to be self-learners and self-educators than to set their own goals for their project and to look into their own research. And then, you know, I had a 4-H member who had a self-determined project with violin because he was a violinist. And then he set all these goals with that, and he did a 4-H demonstration, went to Montana 4-H Congress with that, finished in the top 10 as far as I remember, might have gone on to National 4-H Congress with that very project. So
Amazing.
design your own.
A really basic question.
Yes.
I should have asked at the beginning. What does 4-H stand for?
The 4-H's are head, heart, hands, and health.
Okay.
It's part of our pledge.
Yep.
And the end of that pledge is for our club, for our community, for our country, and for our world. And so we repeat that at every 4-H event, and I hope and I see the evidence that that sinks in, that our members are really dedicated to serving others. And in fact, there's been a longitudinal study by independent researchers of the 4-H program nationwide, and 4-H members are 4 times as likely to contribute to their communities and serve their communities. They're twice as likely to have a goal to be a good leader in their lifetime. So.
Well said. And I want to bring out something about designing your own 4-H program. When we had Abby Burrows, Mary Burrows' daughter, on with her rabbit called something, I don't remember what it was, cute rabbit. We had a caller from Dillon call in and volunteer to start a 4-H program for news broadcasting, radio broadcasting, because she owned several radio stations in the state, and she volunteered to start a 4-H program there. So reaching out, yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there.
Right. Well, as I look across at the people running this program, there was a program that ran for many years called Vid Kids. And it was out of Marr County, and it was a volunteer who had that enthusiasm, and they produced several promotional videos for 4-H. So
I like it. The caller from Ballantyne is clarifying that the fleet beetles were on turnips. What do they need to do? I'll let you two decide, then I'll throw my 2 cents in.
Marnie Rolston published a ag alert on flea beetle management in kitchen gardens and flower beds. You may look that up if you want to know her 2 cents on that. She's very knowledgeable when it comes to advising folks on how to manage insects in ag sectors as well as in garden systems.
Okay.
So what I would say is they really do like the brassicas, so cabbage and their relatives. And so in turnips, what some people have found success with are trap crops. And so whether that's radishes or eggplants, planting them in the vicinity a little bit earlier than your desired plants, and then controlling them on those specific plants as they go to them, because they'll choose the larger plants in a landscape. And you can use that as a way to control them with whatever treatment method you want.
Okay, and I have a method. There used to be a product called Diazinon. It was an insecticide who never was taken off the market. It was never relabeled because of the cost of relabeling some products for ornamentals and vegetables. If you have some Diazinon left, if you put a teaspoon in a gallon of water and drench that row when you plant turnips or radishes, you will not have flea beetle 1. It really works, but it's impossible to find. So I just thought I'd mention it. Still does work, and it's still legal.
There's always ornamental cabbages, right?
There you go.
I actually tried imidacloprid, but they fattened up on that insecticide. So and I was late putting it on. So from Billings, this is for me, and I can't answer this, but Paul will do it next week. We need to find out more about how to sign up for the newsletter. She is struggling with finding a link. I promise you, next week we'll have the information on how to sign up for the newsletter, and we'll have it on screen for you. Question here for Jane. We've still got a little time left. This came from Kalispell, and this person says, and probably correct, their perception is that 4-H is focused on agriculture. But it's broader than that. I think you've mentioned that, but it is not only agriculture.
it is not only agriculture. I would love to dispel that myth. I visited with people when I was traveling who said, oh, I wasn't in 4-H because I didn't live on a farm. And like, oh my goodness, I would bet half of our membership does not live on a farm or ranch. There are so many ways to be involved. I was thinking about that career aspect of 4-H, and we had a group who did a bioscience program that was hosted here on the MSU campus. It was part of grant-funded education, and for 5 years, students from across the state came through the 4-H program to learn neuroscience and metabolomics and all these different other infectious disease, and it was a phenomenal program. And that did not distinguish that you had to raise an animal, raise a crop. Ag is a big part of our state, and it's a big opportunity to expose youth to what it takes to raise livestock, to raise crops, where food comes from. And sometimes there are partnerships where kids who live in town are housing an animal with someone who lives out of town. So there are so many ways to do 4-H. I just hope that that would not deter someone from enrolling their youth. The leadership aspect of the program is phenomenal.
Okay, if you're interested, get a hold of your local county extension office and they'll provide you with all the information.
Yes.
We're getting a long time, but I do want this question to come up because a Bozeman caller says he's been growing tomatoes for years, but this year they have been extremely small but very tasty. He's wondering why they are so small, and he's added 10-10-10, which is a fertilizer combination, and ammonium sulfate. But there is no difference in size. Any idea why they're small this year?
I guess I'm looking at Abby like, why are they small? I'm thinking maybe it's been kind of hot for like days and weeks on end. Maybe that plays a role in that.
And so I've read that the ideal development time for tomatoes is between 70 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit for the fruit development. And so if those temperatures are much higher, which in July we had those high 90s days and even in the low hundreds in many places, that could interrupt the development and slow it down.
My potatoes actually, and I haven't dug them all because I'm lazy, but bottom line is they weren't that small. Folks, we're down to the end of another program. First of all, I want to thank you, Jane, especially Jane, for coming in. Special guest. I learned a lot about 4-H. Erica, you'll be back, I'm sure. Abby, as always, the phone answers. Next week, we have a special guest. Seth Bodner from the University of Montana, actually he's the president of the University of Montana, will be our guest. And he'll talk about how the University of Montana is involved in agriculture. So with that, join us next week. You'll find it interesting. Good night.
For more information and resources, visit montanapbs.org/aglive.
Montana Ag Live is made possible by the Montana Department of Agriculture, MSU Extension, the MSU Ag Experiment Station of the College of Agriculture, the Montana Wheat and Barley Committee, Cashman Nursery and Landscaping, and the Gallatin Gardeners Club.